because they bring with them the ideas from Latin American countries that have revolutionary import because the United States has destroyed those countries, because the people are in revolt against them in various forms. The immigration issue serves to pit worker against worker, black against white. That's divide and rule in order to lower the wages of all and keep everyone in fear. The argument that immigrants are taking our jobs. I can't tell you how many friends I have who are absolutely dying to go into the 100-degree temperatures of the Central Valley in California and do stoop labor for $5 an hour. There's tremendous competition for that work among the American working class. The prisons are amazing. The United States is #1 in the world in the percentage and number of its people in prison. 3.5 million people in the United States, 75% black and Latino. 1 out of every 3 black males is in prison during the course of his lifetime, as opposed to 1 out of 20 whites in the United States.
Egregious.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Egregious.
I just said it's egregious.
Yeah. There are 7 million people today in American prisons or under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. It's called the prison industrial complex because it is one of the most profitable industries there is. Not only do the prisons get paid for housing them at $50,000, but they are also obligated to pay these prisoners for working in Fortune 500's 500 corporations. Take a guess what the average wage of a prisoner is hourly in the United States. 50 cents. Georgia and Texas, it's 0, and they have to work. And in the privatized prisons, they don't accept, by agreement with the government, people who are debilitated, ill, physically unable. They only take strong workers to work in the prisons. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is increasingly privatized with people who work for nothing. The people who cleaned up the oil spill in Louisiana, large numbers of them were prisoners. Slave labor. And what is necessary in order to justify it? The promotion of racist ideas that blacks are criminals, that Latinos are terrorists. Political prisoners are on the rise too in the United States. For the past 16 years, I've been a national coordinator of the defense of Mumia Abu-Jamal. How many of you know who Mumia is? Okay, so I won't bother. But prior to 1996, when they passed the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, 40% of all state court convictions in murder cases were reversed on appeal to the federal courts. Why were they reversed? Incompetent counsel, police corruption, intimidation of witnesses, planting of evidence, and all kinds of other violations of fundamental democratic rights, which poor people had no legal resource or counsel to defend themselves against. So in 1996, they decided this is too high a percentage. We have to eliminate the right to appeal, habeas corpus, the right to appeal to a higher court. So they passed the AEDPA, which contains with it a provision which says that federal courts must grant a presumption of correctness to the findings of state courts, as opposed to the concept that you're innocent until proven guilty, that you have a right to appeal all the evidence. So in Mumia's case, 27 out of 29 of the counts against him, including documentation of police corruption, jury intimidation, witnesses who were intimidated and threatened with prison if they didn't testify against them, confiscation of evidence of innocence, and all the rest were thrown out of court on the grounds that the rulings of the racist, quote, "I'm going to hang the nigger," I'm going to help them hang the nigger, Judge Sabo. That's what Sabo said in his anteroom to his courtroom as he proceeded to begin the trial against Mumia. Known as the hanging judge, he sentenced more people to execution, the overwhelming majority black and Latino, than any judge in the United States. He was Mumia's judge.
5 minutes.
But I have 40 minutes left. I'm on American time.
That's worth less than
We'll see
Canadian
about
these
that,
days.
Jeff. Now they call it imperial time.
Right. Imperial time.
Now he has 4 minutes. Now he has 4 minutes.
I'm also the West Coast coordinator of Lynne's defense. Lynne and I went to high school together. We taught in New York City together. She's an attorney for 30 years, and she's she's an attorney who defended the blind Egyptian Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, who was accused falsely of aiding and abetting terrorism in 1995. So she issued a press release on his behalf. Her co-counsel, by the way, was Ramsey Clark, who was the former Attorney General of the United States. Lynne's no lightweight. And Abdeen Jabara, who is the founder of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. So she issued a press release about the conditions of, I don't know if you remember the guy, but Hosni Mubarak, and the torture and murder that his regime was conducting in Egypt. This was 10 years ago. And the group that the blind sheikh was a member, Omar Abdel Rahman, was a member of the Islamic group that had been taking reprisals against Mubarak for his murder and torture of the members of his group that they had imprisoned. So Lynne issued a press release where the blind sheikh was asked by his followers in Egypt, should they continue this civil war? And he said, well, you have to decide that yourself. And for issuing that press release, Lynne was first sentenced, convicted of conspiracy to aid and abet terrorism, and sentenced to 28 months. And the U.S. Court of Appeals was outraged with the sentence and demanded the judge changed it, remanded it back, and Lynne is now serving 10 years in prison. A cancer victim, 71 years old, diabetes, and she issued a press release in violation of a SAM, Special Administrative Measure. Anybody else who does that, that measure says, if you're representing someone who's convicted of terrorism, you can't issue a press release. And usually when that happens, the government says, okay, your punishment is, you can no longer visit your client for 3 months. You have to sign another SAM. In Lynne's case, the punishment was 10 years in jail. These prisons are no joke. They pay people to turn in their kids in the United States. Poor people in black communities are paid $5,000, $10,000 to turn in their children for drugs, in return for which they get the $5,000 or $10,000. Their kids go to jail for $25,000 a head. Judges have been convicted of sentencing people in collaboration with the prison industrial complex and getting a kickback on the money they brought in. They have a bill today that was a couple of years ago that was pending, where the government wanted to set up a committee of academics, because of course academics know a lot, to study all different ideologies in the United States to determine which is inherently prone to terrorism, like Islamofascism. And therefore, if you are a member of that prescribed group, you are subject to government penalties.
Republicans?
You know about the Patriot Act. The Internet, we used to say, the Internet is our vehicle anyway, The Internet is increasingly taken over by the major corporations, their names turned in to government agencies, university campuses, and so on. I want to conclude with this, if I could have an extra minute or two.
No, you haven't used your time yet, Jeff.
Oh, great, thanks. Why is all this happening? Why this attack on civil liberties and democratic rights? What is the government worried about? Well, of course, it needs an ideological justification for its wars. So the terrorism has replaced anti-communism. Does that mean that fascism is coming to the United States? No. Yes. No. Don't take that off my time. That was... Fascism came in the American form as an experiment in 1946, 1947, during the McCarthy era. The ruling class was worried that the massive labor mobilizations in 1946, the largest in history in this country, bigger than the 30s, were paralleling the massive mobilizations of the European working class in the post-war period, where the governments of Italy and France were all pro-fascist, and the workers were in revolt. So the American ruling class thought that they were going to get the same massive mobilizations against them. And they introduced the McCarthy-era witch hunt legislation. And they didn't need it. They dumped McCarthy after a couple of years, but conveniently kept all the McCarthy-era laws on the books. When did they go off the books? During the fight against the Vietnam War and the American civil rights struggles. Going into those struggles, we never had a socialist speak at an anti-war demonstration. Martin Luther King was branded as a communist. But the stronger those social movements came, the more those laws were declared by the result of the massive power of people in motion in the streets unconstitutional. So all of the McCarthy-era legislation regarding speech, travel, association was, most all of it, was thrown out the window, not because there were some good justices that finally made it to the Supreme Court, but rather there was a social movement that would not accept the witch hunting, would not accept pitting people against each other in the interests of the rich. Today, the attack on civil liberties has reached enormous points and rights gained. Wisconsin is an example. Hundreds of thousands were in the streets because they took away the rights that workers had gained in struggle against the bosses. Glenn Ford, the Black Radical Agenda editor, publication in the United States Online, reported that the state of Michigan wants to put legislation on board wherein any time the state declares it a public emergency, it can remove the power of all elected governments to oversee any aspect of the economy. That is, it can wipe out any collective bargaining law or any other piece of legislation which it deems, when it deems an emergency. So our United National Anti-War Committee, UNAC, which you'll hear more about it later, defends all the victims of the FBI repression, has united with the Muslim community, which is formed, as Chris said the other night, the Muslim Peace Coalition. We had 2,000 Muslims in New York City out of a demonstration of about 10,000 people. That's the largest percentage ever. We said to the Muslims, the anti-war movement is your home. We defend your rights. And not only that, we oppose the slaughter of the people in North Africa and Muslim communities. We're against Islamophobia. And we put it on our banners. Does it say it anywhere here? And that one. There it is. Stop government assaults on unions. No to racist attacks on Muslim immigrants and people of color. Civil liberties for all. That's an anti-war slogan. And so are all the others. That's the way to build a united movement. To make it a home for everyone who's a victim of government oppression, to defend everyone's civil liberties, and understand the connection between all of these. Bring the troops home now. Civil liberties for everyone. A united democratic mass action independent of the capitalist party's anti-war movement is a good start to fight against government repression. Thank you.
Okay, so before we open up the floor for questions and intervention, just a pause for the cause. And I'm going to tell everyone that we have a raffle. Christos?
Yes, right here.
Yep. We have a raffle, 2 bottles of Cuban rum given to us by the Consul General, Ore. And it's later, before you go tonight, pick up some tickets. One ticket is $2, 3 for $5, and the draw is there's 2 bottles, so you have 2 chances. Will take place on Saturday evening. Okay?
Don't bother buying your tickets, I've already won.
Listen here, Jeff Mackler. Okay, story, Jaime, you can't buy a ticket.
He's waving it.